So welcome back to Third Age Reforged, and a little bit of deja vu here because we are on the same map as last time, the new frozen lake bed, and it is going to be another 3v3. And again, in the early stages of these patches, most battles are going to be like this. It's going to take a little bit of time before sort of people start feeling a little bit more comfortable with the mechanics, before sieges start coming in that are of the sort of level that can be shown, like close sieges, that is. And obviously some pretty significant changes with regards to the archers and the rangers in particular do mean that the dynamic of sieges will have changed quite a bit, because two rangers obviously in a defensive siege would have been extremely powerful in 0.95, but now obviously a little bit different. So we'll go through the army compositions first of all, starting off with Crimson Behali, who sent me the replay, so thank you to Crimson. And we've got Rudar. Now Rudar, of course, I've said before, are one of my more favoured factions, and I do like them for their ability to do several things. They can inflict a lot of damage very quickly at close range with their javelins and with their shock troops, and also a lot of their units can hide as well, so they aren't quite so susceptible to the massed skirmish approach, because obviously if your units can hide, they can't be targeted early on, which is a bit of a saving grace for many of them, because armour isn't Rudar's strongest suit. And also they can field units in pretty large quantities, so for example these Dunman Hunters here at the front, there are 203 of them in every unit, and of course that means they can get a lot of volume downrange, and it means they can skirmish pretty well despite the fact that they are a unit which is of lower quality and have got relatively low armor value. So he's got two units, I believe, of the Dunman Hunters at the front. Actually no, that's just a singular unit, and then over here he has got the slightly more high tier Rudar marksmen. Obviously, they're not high tier, but they are a little bit better than the Dunman Hunters, primarily in the fact they've got one more missile damage and they do have a lot more ammunition capacity. Whether that will come into it remains to be seen, because obviously just like the Dunman Hunters, they can be skirmished down relatively easily as far as the individual unit models go, and obviously the skirmish fight is probably going to go on for a little while over here, depending on who he's fighting. Yeah, he's up against Umbar, so that's going to be two icebergs rubbing up against one another once again. Rudar with the quantity of archers and Umbar, of course, with the armour. Up close, however, Rudar could do a decent amount of damage to Umbar with units like the Etten Troll Hunters, obviously. The armour-piercing javelins that they have are going to be able to do extreme amounts of damage to several of Umbar's heavy infantry units. They double as spears in melee as well, so they're not easy to cav charge down, and of course you do run the risk, if you charge into them with cavalry, of taking a volley at close range before you actually get your charge off, which can be devastating, particularly with how much damage the Troll Hunters can do. And yeah, I do like the Troll Hunters. They're mechanically at least, they were one of my favourite units in the 0.95. We'll see. I can't imagine they've changed all that much in 0.96, to be honest with you, in terms of the role they fill. Potentially very, very powerful indeed. Then we go over to Rudar's cavalry force, which is somewhat varied. Over here we have the Dunman Scouts, which are the lower tier of cavalry. There are quite a lot of them in a single unit, however, and they are cheap, relatively speaking, as far as cavalry goes. So they might not look like much, but they can if they get a decent charge off, they can do a lot of damage, punch well above their weight, and especially when they're backed up by the other units of cavalry, like these Coldfell Maidens over here, the Jav Cav, of course, which can double as pretty effective tar pits in many ways. They're more resilient than most horseback units against archers, at least the ones that aren't the high tier units anyway. And obviously they do have those javelins which can greatly influence a cav to cav engagement, and if you put them with the Dunman Scouts, of course, that means you can have your Dunman Scouts can punch well above their weight with the support of these javelins over here. Crimson has gone for a sort of a U formation back here. Let's go and have a look at these units first of all. The Troll Short Axe Throwers are one of the units which can hide, which is very good for them, because unlike the Etten Troll Hunters, of course, they lack a shield value and they lack pretty much any armor values really. But as axe throwers, they can do a decent amount of damage at close range when they throw their axes. They aren't particularly great in melee, unlike the other skirmisher units which Rudar have available to them, like the Ferandine Berserkers, the Etten Troll Hunters, and the Forodrim Javelins. The Troll Short Axe Throwers are not quite as good in melee, but they can still do a lot of damage at range with their axes, and there are a lot of them. 158 is no small amount of men in a unit, and that means they can get a lot of axes off very quickly, especially if they're hidden and then they suddenly reveal themselves. It can often be too late for you to get your infantry out of the way before they get a volley off. Another unit that can hide are the Rudar Axemen, so the two-hander shock units. They were previously called the Forodrim Axemen, I think, at least at some point in development they were. They're not too dissimilar, honestly, to the old Riddermark Axemen from Rohan. But they can hide, and I think they are slightly cheaper, but they are of course slightly worse in melee to compensate for that. They've got terrible defensive values, to be honest. They've got next to no armor, and they've got like a defense value of 3, so they will fall away relatively quickly without support. They do have a lot of attack value. They've got a good charge bonus as well. So against armored units, especially when they're hidden, you know, I've tried and failed to do an ambush with these guys in the past, but it can work. I know it can. We'll see if Crimson can make it work where I failed. And over here we can see the Franadine Rangers, of course. Rangers, you know my opinion on Rangers from the last video. I'm still not entirely sure I approve of their existence in their current form. But the Franadine Rangers, of course, another unit that can hide for Rudao. Very, very powerful with that body piercing. Back here, another unit that can hide. Black Wolves. They're essentially Uruk-hai Berserkers in a new skin. And, you know, that means they have next to no armor values. All of their survivability comes from their 2 HP. And they, of course, have that Horde formation as well. Now, over here, we have the more units of Kolfel Maiden. So that is, of course, another unit of Jav Cav. And as we move over here, we get into Crimson's more survivable infantry corps. A couple of units at the front of these Franadine pikemen, of course, one of 2 pike units to now have a significant shield value from the front. The other one being the new Umbaran pike, which we might see in the army that is opposite Rudao here. Very good pike unit. I do like the Franadine pikes. And then back here, just to back them up, he's got some Rudao swordsmen as well, the workhorse of the Rudao army. I'm sure that he's got some cavalry somewhere. Yes, we just missed them, but this is, of course, the Franadine nobles. Unlike the other knights, they are arm-piercing in melee, but they do have lower defensive values to make up for that. So we'll see how they do against Umbar. Speaking of which, let's go and have a look at Umbar. Again, I'm taking a little bit more time over the army compositions in this sort of situation because it is a field battle where it will matter slightly more so than a siege where, you know, generally speaking, it's, you know, your composition in a siege will largely be the same from battle to battle. We have Yale over here, who is playing as Law Yale. He's playing as Umbar. At the front, he's got some Corsair archers who traditionally can hide, but they're just at the front here, large and in charge. We'll see how they can do. I mean, I imagine that the Rudao units will be quite comfortable to skirmish with the Corsair archers, to be honest with you. Again, going for a more quantity approach here. I'm actually surprised he didn't go for any of the armoured archers. He might have some in his back ranks, although it doesn't look like it. I can only assume he's got some... Oh, no, he does. I'm blind. But over here, his front line consists of mainly Belagai halberds, so he has the armour-piercing polearm. Now, the pikes will outrange them, at least in theory. That's what I've been told now that it is finally working. And the Belagai halberds. So that means they won't do too well against the Franadine pikes anymore, but against the other Rudao units, they should be able to hold them at bay. And then just mixed in amongst them, you can see that he's got some Abrazani Nadu Tariq. I question bringing them. If he knew he was up against Rudao, honestly, an armor-piercing unit like this with low attack values is not really the sort of thing I would bring against Rudao. They are shielded, but I would have gone for something else. I definitely would have punted for some Castamir's Legion, I think, or at least more units of Castamir's Legion. Maybe some Abrazani Narduzagar as well, just to help out. Just in behind, we have the slightly more armoured and shielded Balagai archers, so he should be able to outlast Rudao at range. So I'm not sure what Crimson will do in the early game to sort of counteract this. Back here, we do have some Castamir's Legion, probably my favourite looking unit in the game at the moment. I just love their style, and also in this sort of situation they will be very effective. There's not much in terms of a melee unit Rudao could bring against them other than probably the Black Wolds, and if the Rudao Axemen get a good charge off and in a favourable position, they should be able to do quite well as well. But against stuff like Rudao Swordsmen, they'll be able to clean them up all day long. He's got one unit of pikemen back here, presumably just to sort of guard his back lines from any cavalry. And then he also has some cavalry of his own, so he's got some Numenorian Lancers, a very effective Lancer cavalry. And over here he has Knights of his own, the Warlords of Umbar. I think in a straight-up engagement the Franadine Nobles would win because of their AP, but the Warlords of Umbar will survive against any sort of ranged threats for a lot longer because they have higher armour values. So that's the first matchup. Moving along, there's probably some hidden units for Umbar as well, like I would imagine there's Castamir's Rangers in there, probably some crossbow Corsairs as well, but we shall see. Over here we have the Dwarves of Erebor, played by Bop Tanta. He's got some mercenary cav on the flanks, as often you'll see with the Dwarves, just to sort of guard their flanks more than anything else, as the centre is where most of their strength is going to be, particularly from the Erebor Dwarves here. Several units of Ironfoot crossbows here at the front, I think 3, well we've got some Blacklock Engineers here, over here actually. So he's got a very heavy core of crossbow unit, so it's going to be very difficult to sort of try and cav charge his army down, because as soon as all the crossbows get trained onto your cavalry, you can kiss it goodbye, especially with the Blacklock Engineers on hand. Back here he's got some miners, just to sort of bulk out his front line with some Ironfoot spears just in behind them. And then what else has he got? Not much of anything. I mean, back here he does have some Highborns. So this is his General's Bodyguard unit, of course, previously known as the Dwarven Nobleman. He's got a catapult back here, which might be different now. I think There was talk about only Khazad-dûm having the sort of multi-shot catapult, but I don't know whether the Dwarves of Erebor have retained it. Relatively small army though by the Dwarves over here. He's gone mainly for crossbows, so we'll see if that pays off. Not much for me to talk about there though. Over here we have the Orcs of the Misty Mountains, played by a lucky Hussar. At the front he of course has got some sort of relatively low tier archers here, which they do outrange the Dwarves, so they can actually coax the Dwarves into range, but the catapult might be a little bit scary. The Troll Drums of course almost a must with the Misty Mountains, considering the fact that they can break very easily, more so than the other Orc factions I believe. Their morale is not terrific. They of course probably took a bit of a nerf overall because of the lack of, well, because of the reduction at least in the fear causing units that they had, but you know, that was kind of necessary really. Some Warg skirmishers over here, so the Dwarven mercenary cavalry will not do too well against the Warg skirmishers. They need to stay well clear of them, but we'll see how that goes. Some Drake Broodlings as well, very much a hit and miss unit. If you manage to use them well, they can do enormous amounts of damage, but if they're focused down, they can fall away pretty quickly. Although there aren't such a thing as flaming bolts, so maybe the Drake Broodlings will be alright. Over here, a new unit model for the Black Urks of the Mountains. They look a little bit more impressive and high res now. But you know, they still fill the same role though. They are basic shock troops. One of the more expensive units that you can bring is the Misty Mountains to sort of pad your infantry line out, but they should do relatively well against any Dwarven spears that they encounter, although any Dwarven units of genuine quality, if there are any halberds for example that I missed in that composition, the Black Urks will be in a little bit of trouble. Back here, a huge core of heavy goblin infantry just padding out the numbers of the Misty Mountains line. Over on this side we do have the General, I believe, indeed, there is Azog, and a unit of Bolg's Champions, again, very good cavalry hunters. They need to steer well clear of the Dwarven crossbows, however. And then a very potent tool that the Orcs of the Misty Mountains have available to them, the Cave Trolls. Probably the best line breakers in the game at the moment, to be honest with you. I was fearing that the loss of the Blackwatch Legion to Angmar would harm the Misty Mountains almost irreparably, but the Cave Trolls fill that role arguably better. They do die more quickly, particularly if you get a nice volley of javelin fire onto them. However, the Cave Trolls break through a line almost instantly. It's very difficult to protect your skirmishers when the Cave Trolls are around, and you often need your skirmishers against the Misty Mountains with how many units they can bring. There's also a huge core of heavy goblin spears here. With their AP values, they should do relatively well against the Dwarves as well. And then the final army on the blue team, we have Khand, played by Savage Paradox, with a couple of units of nomadic infantry. He's gone for a much more infantry-focused Khand army than is traditional. He's got some Variag Bowmen here at the front. So the Variag Bowmen, they do have shield values as well. Relatively good at skirmishing, to be honest with you. There is another unit. I think they're still called the Nerniag Infantry. But there is, of course, the other sort of Khandish skirmisher that they bring in. Mainly, they are based around that on foot. They do have the ability to withstand quite a lot of arrow fire. Back here we have the Nurad Footman, of course. When you go for an infantry-heavy Khand build, you know, this is always the unit you're going to see, because they are, of course, very solid, very dependable, good at absorbing arrow fire, good at standing up to punishment, and they are AP. Against skill-based factions like the Elves, though, you know, they do tend to struggle just a little bit. Back here we have another all-new unit. We have the Nurad Warchiefs Retainers, which I believe are halberds, so they are a halberd bodyguard unit, which would be a first, actually, I think, in the game. Although I swear I'm missing something. No, of course, the Angmar Enslavers are the other one. But, you know, similar story with these guys, so they're going to be sitting in the middle of the line, hopefully doing their armor-piercing damage. They've got some very interesting-looking glaives and serpent pikes there. Back here, we, of course, Khand are always going to bring at least some cavalry, and we have some Nurad Windblades. Pretty vulnerable to arrows, despite the fact they have multiple HP, but in melee, they are extremely deadly against other cavalry units, and they are very fast as well. Another fast-moving cav unit are the Brotherhood of the Lance, of course, lethal on the charge, but again, very fragile, because they don't even have any HP. And back here we have the other cav units, and unsurprisingly they've gone for quite a few horse archers. So we do have the Chieftain's Vanguard. Who is this lad back here? Ah yes, this is the Khandish General, the new Khandish General. So he has what looks like the Black Knight's Glaive from Dark Souls, and he has, obviously, Chieftain's Vanguard, multiple HP horse archers, and then over here, a couple of units of Wind Riders actually, which are melee cavalry, unshielded, but good in a fight against other cav units. They've got an upgraded unit model now as well, so that's good to see. And of course the Brotherhood of the Bow. And finally, before we can get into the action as it happens, we have Arthedain, played by DF Thorne. He's got some Arthedain marksmen here at the front and some Evandem archers. Arthedain are another human faction which are very good at skirmishing down their opponents, although Khan might have something to say about that. We'll see how that goes. Back here he's got some Arthedain men-at-arms. They will do pretty poorly against the Nurad Footmen, to be honest with you. But in the middle, Arthedain's phalanx is going to be in effect. The Arthedain pikemen should be able to hold off the vast majority of the Khandish infantry line at bay, provided they're supported. And it looks like they are going to be, because Arthedain have brought the dismounted knights for Numinas, a very tanky unit indeed, obviously. Elite infantry, got some mercenary war chiefs either side of them, as well as some Dunedain peacekeepers, and some dismounted Fornost Rain knights. And then the Arthedain cavalry's no pushover either. I do think Khand will have the advantage no matter what for this situation though. The Dunedain mounted company, I think, on both sides indeed, and then in the middle, the general is going to find himself in the very tough to break down Knights of Numinas. So, let's begin. Interesting to see how this will work out. I'm not sure who I would give the advantage to. I think in terms of composition, it's difficult to say. I don't think anyone's got a clear advantage here. It's mainly based on how they play. I think that this will work out. Erebor in the middle might struggle against the range that the Misty Mountains have going on. Arthedain have got the skirmish advantage, at least initially, over here. But as we saw in the last game where Dale wasted all their ammo on those fairly tanky lower tier Gondorian archers, I should say. Gondor are able to reap the benefits of that later on. Meanwhile, over here you can see that the dwarves actually using their melee cab very early on here to pretty decent effect, because the goblin, oh no, the old dwarven catapult is still in effect. And already these goblin archers are, well, this goblin infantry is wavering, so the goblin infantry was there blocking the way to the archers, but these mercenary cavalry doing a lot of damage to that goblin infantry early on. They do need to be careful, however, that the merc cab doesn't get broken down too quickly, otherwise the wargs will then be able to get in behind them. Meanwhile, if you have a look over here, Rudau's cavalry sweeping in from the side. Umbar are a relatively tough nut to crack at the best of times, but here you can see that the Franadine nobles do have a straight shot into the archers. Now is when you really need your crossbows to reveal themselves. It doesn't look as though Umbar have the crossbows, which is unfortunate for them. He does have some Corsair Blackguards, which are almost as good in this situation, but the Rudar cavalry should be able to get out of range relatively quickly. The amount of damage there was relatively limited, fortunately for Umbar, and Umbar are now relentlessly shooting the Coldfell Maidens, so let's just lower the speed, because unlike in the last battle, things are happening relatively quickly here. And you can see that the Rudar and Umbar will be skirmishing with each other, but it's really going to come down to how Crimson uses his cavalry over here, I think, because he has been quite aggressive early on, but Umbar are going to be wise to that from here on out. Meanwhile, you can see that these mounted units for the Misty Mountains are over here. The Misty Mountains are going to be focusing on one flank in particular as well, which is probably wise, because the dwarves have spread themselves relatively thin, and these individual units of dwarven miners are not going to be sufficient to deal with all of these Misty Mountains units. But all the dwarves need to do is hold back the Misty Mountains horde long enough for their crossbows to get significant amounts of damage done. They do still need to target the right things, however, and in particular these Bulk's champions would be a very juicy target. The Misty Mountains losing their general would be a pretty significant blow for them. Bulk's champions taking some hits from the Blacklock engineers, almost called them the Blackwatch Legion there. Yeah, these melee cavalry don't stand a chance against the Bulk's champions in a sustained fight. The Misty Mountains going all-out rush here. They do have a lot of archers. It remains to be seen. Oh, there goes the frame rate. Really does remain to be seen, however, how much damage those dwarven crossbows can do before they are inevitably caught in melee by the Misty Mountains. You can see that already the Misty Mountains are able to get around the flank and get into the Blackwatch Legion, the Blacklock engineers in melee, which is not the best of starts over here for Bop Tanter. Investing that heavily in your crossbows means you have to have the means to defend them, and I'm not sure they do. Although over here, Khand are actually sending over some reinforcements, the Nomadic Light Infantry coming over to try and help them out. But the Drake Broodlings are going to make quick work of them off the charge. Nomadic Light Infantry are chaff at best, ill-equipped to deal with Volk's Champions and Drake Broodlings, and they already got cut to bits there. Several of them getting destroyed. I think I'm going to need to turn it down again. The Misty Mountains will run out of steam eventually, but initially this fight is going in their favour. I think they're doing all the right things by being very aggressive and taking advantage of the fact that the dwarves have gone for a more skirmish-heavy approach. The Ironfoot Spears, they need to relocate, really. This Goblin Infantry victory is a distinct possibility against those mercenary melee cav. Again, not the best charge on melee cav, and you can see that already there are dwarven minor units that are routing. Chaos is erupting here in the dwarven lines. And the Drake Broodlings also charging into the side, charging into the rear of the Dwarven lines. So at this point, I mean, the blue team can't afford to rest on their laurels here, simply because if they keep waiting for too long, the Misty Mountains are going to smash the dwarves to bits, and then they're going to have some goblins reinforcing one flank or the other. So Khand are going to need to get into position. I mean, Arthedain are also moving forward in some capacity. What's going on over there? Grey Company, which must have been hidden. Grey Company going after the Brotherhood of the Lance, and again, the body piercing is going to rip these Wind Blades and these Brotherhood of the Lance asunder. I mean, the Wind Blades might be able to catch up to them, to be honest, but with all of these foot archers in support as well, the relatively fragile Khandish cavalry on this flank will likely not last all that much longer. Indeed, the Wind Blades and the Brotherhood of the Lance are falling back. Khand have got their front line in order, though. Meanwhile, over here, chaos in the centre, fire arrows flying everywhere. The Drake Broodlings have been used to good effect here, getting rear charges, cleaning up weaker units that were being used as reinforcements. And the Highborns of Erebor are over here, and again the Drake Broodling is going to get a nice charge into the Dwarven General unit, which is going to cut them down to size, I would have thought. And actually the Highborns of Erebor, only one unit model falling there, standing relatively resolute, that's what hit points will do for you. And the Troll Drummers in the mix, really doing a lot to help out the Goblin push here, and the Misty Mountains doing a very good job there. Going too crossbow heavy there has come to cost the dwarves in many ways. Meanwhile, what is going on over here? You can see here that Coalfell Maiden's almost in wedge formation there. Dunman Scouts getting a nice charge there into the Corsair Blackguards, trying to prevent them from firing their payload, which is really the most important thing at this stage. Castamir's Legion moving in. The Rudauer Axemen getting a decent charge, although it is into pikes, although the pikes are being sort of wrapped around by the Trollshaw Axe Throwers. And over here, this is where having skirmishers, layered skirmishers, is really going to pay dividends for Rudauer, you would imagine. These Warlords of Umbar are now in amongst the Atomor's Troll Hunters, which ironically is not where they want to be, really. As soon as they leave melee, I would imagine the Javelins are going to be thrown into their backs. Castamir's Legion pushing through the lines into the Atomor's Troll Hunters. Honestly, I'm surprised at how aggressive Umbar have been here. I would have thought that Umbar's best bet would be to try and skirmish with Rudauer for as much as they possibly could. It's a situation in which Rudauer don't tend to do very well unless they've gone for a massed hidden unit approach. But Umbar charge forth here, and so far it looks like Rudauer are going to be pretty handily victorious. I mean, these Corsair Blackguards are getting some nice hits into the side of these Rudauer Axemen, but again, those armor-piercing missiles being used on such a lightly armoured unit and relatively cheap compared to several other targets. Coalfell Maidens are presumably out of ammunition now, just trying to prevent the Umbar skirmishers from firing. There are 2 units of Blackguards, so it's a pretty big investment. Going jab to jab with Rudauer is a bold gambit. Numenorian Lancers getting a nice charge there into the rear of the Rudauer front line, but not really enough of them left to affect a huge amount of casualties, and ultimately Rudauer's front line is much thicker than Umbar's at this point. They're able to cover a lot more ground. The Warlords of Umbar are supporting this flank, but this is really the only place where they're winning over here.
They have lost half their men.
And ultimately it does look as though Rudauer are going to be successful. Meanwhile, over here in the middle you can see the final stand of the dwarves. Bok Tanta, unfortunately for him, his army composition kind of made this a bit of a foregone conclusion in many ways. If the Misty Mountains had been content to try and skirmish with the dwarves, it could have been a different story, but the aggression of the orcs of the Misty Mountains was too much for the dwarves. They needed more infantry, and they needed more infantry of quality as well. The basic dwarven units is going to be more than enough to deal with basic heavy goblins, but they had mixed into that stuff like the Drake Broodlings, and the Black Uruks are a decent unit in their own right as well, and the Trolls, of course. The crossbows could have been used to bring the Trolls to heel, but
only half our force remains.
The good play here from the Orcs and Misty Mountains rendered that a little bit more difficult. Meanwhile, if we have a look over here, we can see the frontline engagement is underway. Khand getting some rear charges there into the Arthedain marks when they're out of ammunition, and it looks as though Khand are having the best of the infantry fight over here. Several of the Arthedain units have charged in, but they haven't been faring too well. In fact, Khand are winning pretty handily on this side. You can see the Knights of Anuminas trying to charge in, but they charge into the backs mainly of their own pikemen, which means they're not really going to get a great deal of damage done. They're also under skirmish fire. What's going on back here? Dunedain Peacekeepers, again, just some low tier units that have been sent around the flanks to pressure the Arthedain skirmish line. Dunedain Rangers are here, but again, they are also taking charges. And overall, yeah, Khan are going to handily win on this side.
Without him, his troops will lose their will to fight.
So it may very well come down to the Orcs of the Misty Mountains here. They're going to need to move relatively quickly to support one of their allies if they're going to win. And this is where the natural Dwarven resilience might serve the blue team relatively well. Meanwhile, let's go and have a look at what's going on over here. Again, I think it's best if we turn the speed down just a tad. Here we can see that the Belagair archers have been caught in melee, and the Black Waltz are in here as well. The Black Waltz, they are taking a bit of skirmish fire, which is very bad for them, of course, with their very low armour values. But in a sustained fight against a lot of the Umbar troops, the Black Waltz are a relatively safe bet with their armour-piercing values and their very high attack values. Corsair archers out here on the flank trying their best to sort of fire in. But I think the advantage still rests squarely with Rudar, although on this flank, Umbar have done very well. Castamir's Legion, the Belagair Halberds and Footmen working in tandem with one another. And then over here we also have the Warlords of Umbar still in pretty good fighting shape, to be honest with you, and it looks like they're going to be going after the Trollshaw axe throwers. They need to get in there quickly, otherwise the axes are going to get a volley off on them. Oh, they bottled it. That's not good. Now they're going to take a volley in the back. Oh, why did he bottle it? If he charged in, he might have gotten hit by the pikes, but if you commit to a charge like that, you need to follow through. Although Umbar have managed to sort of weather the storm quite a bit over here. There are these Thranodine nobles which have taken a lot of damage over the course of the battle. Only 4 of them remain, including the general though. Belagair archers. I don't know. I mean, it's going to be, I think Rudar have got enough to deal with them. They've still got those axe throwers after all, which are going to be a lethal tool as the fight goes on. The Warlords of Umbar though, I mean, it's even over here. It is even. And there are these Belagair Halberds that are returning. Those Coldfell Maidens are still in relatively decent shape. They don't have any ammunition left though, so their utility is going to be limited to sort of harassing the skirmishes at this point. And this here is where Rudaur's strongest position of infantry was. And I do say was, because a lot of those Rudaur swordsmen just got flattened by those warlords. I don't know though, those Trollshaw axe throwers are still going to be a huge asset later on. And I think the warlords are going to be able to deal with these Coldfell Maidens. So the Coldfell Maidens do give them the slip. Very interesting fight going on over here. Meanwhile, I think the collapse of Arthedain is being finalised based on the fact that a lot of these red triangles are leaving the fight. A lot of those units are routing, the Dunedain Peacekeepers routing off. The Nurad Warchiefs retainers still in very fine shape indeed. Still a few individual units there. There's one Nurad Windblade remaining. Bringing them against Arthedain is always a bit of a risky move. The Dunedain Troll Slayers, the Arthedain equivalent of the Etenor's Troll Hunters, doing their best to fight against these Nurad Footmen in melee, but ultimately there aren't enough of them left, of course, and the Nurad Footmen will eventually overwhelm them. But Khan very much victorious on this side, and the Drake Broodlings are also routing, which is interesting, that they were sent over here on their lonesome. And Khan's army is in relatively good shape over here, so the blue team are looking pretty good, to be honest. But what is going on over here? There's still a fight going on. The dwarves are not out of this just yet, although there goes Dane in the middle of that mess. So finally the Misty Mountains are victorious over here, really. What do they have left though? Mainly heavy goblins. Their trolls are mostly all gone. They do have their Volks champions though, which could yet be a very important asset indeed. Umbar though. Initially Umbar were in a bit of trouble, but their survivability has really helped carry them through the worst of it, I think. There goes their general. But that's one of the reasons why I really like Umbar. Their staying power in a fight, even when things are looking pretty bleak against a faction capable of dishing out as much damage as Rudaur, has really helped them here. These Knights of Illuminus are over here though. Arthedain is still alive. Going to try and deal with what's left of the Warlords of Umbar. Actually no, the Warlords of Umbar, they're on the same team. I'm an idiot, once again. So again, Arthedain coming to the aid of Umbar, charging into the back of those Trollshaw axe throwers and actually routing them, so that could be a big moment in this fight. there are also these grey companies. So Arthedain knew they were losing to Khand on the other side, and instead decided to come to the aid of their ally. And this cavalry support, honestly, might be the sort of thing which brings this fight in favour of the red team. There are a lot of these Khandish troops after all, but if Umbar can salvage some of their army, link it up with the Misty Mountains. Misty Mountains have got that mobility of the Bolg's champions. Throwing in there with the Balagir archers and the Corsair archers, still some skirmish firepower going on. And there are some Bolg's champions over here as well.
Foolish general has thrown his life away.
There goes the Rudauer general.
Chances of victory with it.
Mosh pit on Crimson here. As the red team, they are going to be victorious ultimately against Rudauer. Whether Umbar would have been able to do it without the support of his allies over here, I don't quite know. Because the charges from the cavalry have been pretty important, but I don't know, I think Umbar may have had the skirmish firepower to deal with the Trollshaw axe throwers anyway. Most interesting. So it is going to come down to Khand, who of all the armies left are certainly in the best condition, but they are going to be facing off against 3 armies. Well, the Misty Mountains plus whatever Umbar and Arthedain can scrounge together, which is not likely to be all that much. Umbar have got a lot of skirmishers, whether they have enough ammunition left to do anything remains to be seen. The Franadine pikemen though, outranging these Balagire halberds, but they are surrounded. So I think the pikes will eventually fall away, and then it will be a case of seeing how Khand can deal with the onslaught that's going to be brought upon them. The Knights of Illuminus charging in, probably going to be enough to break the Franadine pikes relatively soon. There aren't enough of them left to really keep fighting for that much longer. Is this a routing unit? Yes it is. Let's see what Khand have got left. So they've got several units of footmen, as you would expect. 4 units of them in fact. They've got some units of low tier stuff. They've got their Warchiefs retainers, which could be a big factor. Some skirmishers. And a few units of individual cavalry, but I do worry for the Khandish cavalry in the state that it's in against the likes of the Bolg's champions. So I think this is going to be just about it. Again, we have crested the halfway point.
From the field. We must rally our men before all is lost.
I would imagine that there is going to be a bit of manoeuvring going on here. So yes, indeed, Rudauer have fallen away. And with that, I think what I will do is I will make a little cut, because obviously there's going to be a pretty lengthy manoeuvring process here to get all of the armies together, and I will rejoin you when the battle has been joined once more. So here we go, the final stages of this fight, and we can see that these Variag bowmen do indeed have some ammunition left, and they are going to be firing in as the enemy army approaches, but that's a lot of goblins. And again, just as how the fight in the middle went, the sheer amount of goblins might be enough to simply overwhelm Khand here. They do have a lot of decent tools to deal with them, and without the trolls, the goblins will struggle to disrupt the formation in quite the same way they did in the centre, particularly with all of this AP around the Nurad footmen and the Warchief's retainers. Initially it looks like we're going to be skirmishing, and that's fine for both sides really, because no one really cares about the goblin archers, and if Khand were to choose one unit to try and take all of this firepower, it would be the Variag bowmen. Decent armour, decent shield values. This Khandish cavalry. And we're going out, I think, to both flanks, although there are still those Grey Company over there. Still some Drake Broodlings left, which could disrupt formations. There's those Dunedain Rangers, and if they still have ammunition, that's going to be very bad news indeed for Khand. Kind of rooting for Khand here, simply because they are outnumbered, really. Indeed, there is a 2% deficit here. Arthedain really don't have much of anything left though. In fact, these Rangers may very well be out of ammunition. Dunedain Peacekeepers as well. Umbar don't have much left other than their skirmishers either. They do have some Castamir's Legion, I think. Well, 4 of them. So it is mostly the Orcs of the Misty Mountains with a few support units from the other factions. Oh, a charge here from the Drake Broodlings. They, however, several of them got grilled on the approach, and that's enough to rout them. Seeing as that's the second time they've broken, that might well be enough to finish them off. The Bolg's champions are going to be very difficult for Khand to deal with, I think. They're going to be charging in. The Chieftain's Vanguard fighting what's left of the Warlords. One thing at a time, I suppose, but the Bolg's champions, they can't really afford to let them run rampant behind their lines. The Variag bowmen will probably be best served shooting them, to be honest with you. The front line has been joined, however, and this is something that I would place in favour of Khan, unless those Bolgs champions get some rear charges going on. The low tier infantry is also moving up in support. Variag Wind Riders in around the flank, getting into the Corsair archers. Everything happening all at once. The Nurad Warchiefs retainers getting into the centre of this line, and this heavy Goblin infantry is not going to last too long. So Team Red needs to do something to sort of try and blunt this Khandish front line. Rear charges really from the Volks champions, which at the moment are messing around with these Variag bowmen, which at the to be honest with you are not all that much of a threat. You really need to be charging into the back of this front line, because this is where all of Khan's killing power is. They're also spilling around the flanks as well, getting into the Goblin skirmishes with their low tier nomadic infantry. And even at the back, their Chieftain's Vanguard is disrupting what's left of the Umbar skirmish line, which does still have ammunition, to be fair. Over here, they do still have the Knights of Anuminas charging into the rear of the low-tier Khandish infantry on this side, so they've managed to contain it on that side. The Volks champions do get a rear charge in, killing off some Warchiefs retainers. The Variag Wind Riders blocking their retreat, however. Can the Misty Mountains front line hold on? This is where the lack of quality of the Goblins may shine through. Those Volks champions could prove to be the hero of the hour, charging backwards and forwards between various targets. The Knights of Illuminus are going to be relatively difficult to bring down as well. But you can see these Nurad footmen just absolute champions on the front line, doing huge amounts of damage, again taking a pretty nasty charge from the Volks champions, however, who show no signs of slowing down. Knights of Illuminus being chased by Chieftain's Vanguard. The Warchief's retainers actually pointing the other way to prevent any rear charges from happening, which is understandable. The Misty Mountains are not going to break too easily thanks to the Troll Drummers though. Now wrapping around to the other side. The Troll Drummers are going to be killed actually by these footmen, as well as these heavy Goblin infantry, which are already wavering in spite of the Troll Drummers' presence.
Our ally lies dead. Without their general, they may lose heart.
There goes the Khandish general. That could prove to be a pretty decisive blow. Khan are going to do their best, but I mean they're slowly but surely wrapping up the Goblin front line. But I don't know if they've got. It's going to be real close. Again, it's the gap has lengthened to 3% now. If it comes down to a pure melee fight, I don't think the red team have got what it takes. The Nurad footmen are going to be able to tank out anything they throw at them. But it's the skirmishers, stuff like the Belagire archers, and in particular the Volks champions, which are proving to be match winners here. Still some Chieftain's Vanguard. Those Variag bowmen could try and shoot the Volks champions down, who have lost 5 unit models. Nurad footman. The Volks champions getting another charge off onto this depleted nomadic light infantry. The Castamir's Legion, what's left of them coming in. Very close fight this. Khan doing their best. These Belagire archers shooting into the back of these nomadic light infantry, and again that's going to be enough to break them, surely. Well, they're just wavering. I think they're going to be okay. They are just about going to stick in the fight. That's pretty impressive for a low tier unit like that. Volks champions, again still charging around, still doing what they can. These are Black Urks of the mountains over here though, so the Nurad footmen are encountering significantly more resistance from them than the heavy goblins. Over here, nomadic light infantry and Nurad footmen killing off Dunedain peacekeepers, the Corsair archers slowly but surely being hacked away at by the Nurad footmen, and then the Warchief's retainers killing off these rangers. These Variag bowmen need to do something about these Volks champions though, otherwise I think this fight is going to go in favour of the Reds. And indeed, that is going to be a rout from the Nurad footmen. They can't afford to lose that many footmen. So I think the Volks champions are going to be sufficient enough to carry the day. And I can't help but feel as though these Variag bowmen should have been targeting the Volks champions sooner rather than going after the skirmishers of the enemy. It's not all over yet, but
behold how our cowardly foe runs.
It's going to be difficult.
It's time to press the attack.
Because the percentage difference is not budging. There is a strong point of the Khandish infantry over here though, and if it comes down to just the Warchief's retainers, the Volks champions are not going to cut the mustard, so they're going to need to shoot them with the Belagire archers, because they got nothing left in melee that can stand up to the retainers, and I think can't know it because they're going after the skirmishers rather than the Volks champions. These Black Uruks are still a relatively strong point though. Definitely no pushovers, but now you can see that the Khandish skirmishes are falling away, which is going to allow the Bolgs champions free reign essentially. And these footmen are going to be, oh dear. Again, I think Khan should have probably blobbed up at this point, because that's a waste of a unit of Nurad footman. Just getting squashed by those Bolgs champions. And I think the mobility and ranged advantage is going to lead the Misty Mountains to victory. It's not often you see Khan at a disadvantage when it comes to range and mobility, but here we are. This is the crazy world we live in. The Bolgs champions again. I feel as though errors in judgment have cost Khan here in the late game. I feel as though in several occasions, like going after those skirmishers was not really the sort of thing to do, because they could have just scooted backwards. And overall it's going to be the end here. The percentage gap is widening. So it's going to come down to these Nurad Warchiefs retainers. How strong are they? Still some bowmen, but they're just going to get charged down immediately. This is going to be it. So the Black Uruks are proving to be very ill-equipped to deal with the Warchiefs retainers. I mean, it's not completely out of the question. I still fail to understand the point of sending these Nurad footmen after the Bolgs champions, because they'll just take a single charge and then die off. You just want to be blobbing up, really, trying to absorb everything as best you can. These Warchiefs retainers, though, have put these Black Uruks to the mountains to the sword very quickly. I think what they're trying to do, more than anything, is just sort of protect the Warchiefs retainers at this point. Still a 4% difference. These Warchiefs retainers need to do an awful lot of heavy lifting here to turn this around. If those archers run out of ammunition, it's honestly not impossible. But those Belagair archers have been firing for quite some time. They also need to hope that the charges don't kill off too many of them each time they come in. That time the Bolgs champions took a huge amount of casualties on the charge, going into those halberds from the front. And those Belagair archers, I think, are out of ammunition because they're going into the Nurad footman. Those still have ammo though. The gap closed by a percentage point. Looking at these pikes, or halberds, which look like they're more Chinese in nature than anything else. Those Bolgs champions, though, took a huge hit there. I don't know. Those Belagair archers finished off what was left of the Nurad footman. Those Belagair archers still have some ammo. This singular Black Uruk at the mountain. Fire arrows coming in. I don't think they're going to be able to break the Nurad Warchiefs retainers. They strike me as the sort of unit that have a lot of morale. These Bolgs champions. They're going to charge in. And they turn around. And that's going to be the end of these Bolgs champions. And these Belagair archers still have ammo. I have to be honest, I really hope Khan win this. I can't stand someone who wins by kiting. It makes my blood boil. So I'm really backing Savage Paradox here. But honestly, it's going to be a tall order. Although he's not kiting back this time. Are they going to be able to get a volley off? They are, right at close range. Boiling some of those Warchiefs retainers. And they rout those Belagair archers. So despite the fact that more of the blue team have been killed, not sure what these retainers are doing. Those Belagair archers are routing. They need to go after these ones back here. This could be it. What are they doing? Are they just hoping to chase them off? I hope Khan doesn't lose based on this. I mean, there's honestly not much of a battle left. Now I'm going to turn around. Well, this is going to be it. The last samurai only on foot. Based on the Asian nature of Khan, that's even more apt than it usually is. So let's see, shall we? final stages, the Nurad Warchiefs Retainers, they've got good armour values, they've got a limited shield value because it is on their back, but it is present nonetheless. They're wavering, so yeah, Khan are going to win this. Unbelievably, they managed to fight their way out of that hole. Despite some errors in judgment as well, in my opinion. Most curious. Those Bulge champions, you know, in the end, should really have been recharging the Khandish front line sooner, because the Nurad footmen were the real threat. The Veriag bowmen could have been skirmished down in the late game by the Belagair archers and Corsair archers that were still alive at that time. So there we go.
Victory is ours, but only by a sword's edge.
The Warchiefs Retainers proving their worth as a new unit. Similar to the Angmar's Enslavers in terms of functionality, but very different in terms of style. So Khan, the heroes of the hour, with a fair amount of kills. The Dwarves getting the most kills, but then they were up against a Misty Mountains army that was significantly larger than most others. Only Khan even came close. Arthedain with a smaller army, and it didn't pay off against Khan. Khan were able to skirmish with them relatively comfortably, and in melee the Nurad footmen were more than a match for anything that Arthedain really fielded. Let's have a look though at Crimson's kills. Granadine Nobles doing decently for Knights. Knights you might expect to get a few more kills than that. Coldfell Maidens, again, 87 and 122 is relatively decent considering the amount of ammunition they have. And the Dunman Scouts are more chaff cavalry than anything else, sort of interrupting the Corsair Blackguards. And I do feel as though without support, Rudan may very well have won that flank against Umbar. But obviously we'll never know. The Blackwald's getting a decent amount of kills in a sustained fight. The Axe Thrower is doing decently well. But down here, Granadine Pikemen, 373 and 214 kills. They were very well situated to deal with Umbar in this situation, because Umbar only had one pike unit of their own, which was a drastically lower quality than the Granadine. And overall, you know, they found themselves in a pretty favourable fight, considering the kind of unit they are. Granadine Rangers, 165 kills, again, relatively good return, especially against a more armoured faction like Umbar. But yeah, very well done to the blue team for just about managing to pull that out. You know, a very late game comeback indeed. And yeah, despite the fact this was the same map as the one that I did in the very last battle I showcased, I hope you enjoyed this, because it was one of the closest field battles I've shown for quite some time. And I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.